All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Karen. I'm the Director of Support Services at AGI. For those of us who are joining us for the first time, AGI, or Alzheimer Group, is a charitable organization that supports families and individuals living with dementia. Our services include therapeutic activities for people living with dementia, counseling and support groups for caregivers, as well as courses, web workshops, and webinars. Our education initiatives are made possible by the support of the Lasner Learning Center and the Lindsay Memorial Foundation. Before we begin, please note that the chat feature on the bottom is unavailable in the webinar format, but the Q&A space is where you can write any questions or comments that you have throughout the lecture. So today we're joined by Nora Spinks and Cynthia Loriot. They prefer to introduce themselves, so I'm going to give the floor over to them, but welcome, ladies. We're glad that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am Cynthia Loriot. I am a consultant, certified caregiving consultant, and a consultant with the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. I, in my life, have been a caregiver twice for two parents, each with a terminal illness, and truly believe that there is an opportunity for us to find our way through work and care.
And I'm Nora Spinks. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I too am a caregiver and have been caring for both parents and cared for my, or part of a care team for my mother-in-law who just recently passed away this summer at the age of 105. So lots of diverse experience, and my area of focus is on the workplace. So how do workplaces become more supportive and create the kind of environment where people can thrive while fulfilling both their work responsibilities and those at home as well. Pleasure to be here with you.
Just sharing my screen. All right, so let me know when it comes up, Nora, if you can see it.
Not yet. There we go.
Fantastic. So this is the second in a two-part series of work and care. Last time, a colleague of mine, Christa Haanstra, was with Nora talking about you, the carer, and all the experience that you have and the things that you can do for yourself in order to manage all of the pressures and the experience of caregiving. Today is the second in that series, and it is really looking at work and care and focusing on the strategies that you can employ in order to be able to encourage and engage your workplace in order to be able to make your caregiving experience more fulfilling. We would like to begin, before getting into the meat of the presentation, by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands on which we are gathered today. And while we meet on this virtual platform, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land, which we all call home, where we work and where we care for others. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, the Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home, and we honor and respect Indigenous elders past, present, and emerging. Nora?
Thanks, Cynthia. It is a pleasure to be here. What we're going to be focusing on today is how you can make the most of what services, supports, benefits are available to you, and what to do if those benefits and supports are not available for you. So we're going to be going through a number of topics for you, but in order to know what to focus on, we are going to ask you a couple of questions so that we can make sure that this presentation is as valuable as possible for you. So we're going to ask you to open up your Q&A box, which is down at the bottom, and we're going to ask you 3 questions. So if you go into the Q&A and you just go into add a question, and we will look for your answers. So if you just want to open up your panel, and the first question we want to ask you is, are you currently a caregiver, or are you here as an employer, or are you both a caregiver and an employer, or are you neither? So you might work for an agency or government and you're just here to learn. If you could just pop an answer into the Q&A, just a word or two, that would be awesome. Thank you. So we have some neither. Okay, next question. If you're working full-time, or if you're working, what is your employment status? Are you working full-time or part-time? What's your status? And Cynthia, I'll give you the next question.
And so if you are working, what t-shirt size is your employer? We're going to use this because it's a little bit easier for us to see and to help us give us an idea of who and the types of organizations you work for. So if you're self-employed, your t-shirt size is an extra small. If you have a smaller family business, less than 25 people, the size of your employer is small. 5 to 500 employees is medium, and an extra large is 500 plus. This includes school boards and hospitals and large organizations. And Nora, I'm not certain if I'm seeing a little bit of a delay, but I only see that I'm seeing only one response in the chat, and I see that there's someone who's retired.
That's okay.
So, our purpose today is really to help you understand just how important engaging the workplace is in your caregiving journey, and give you tips, strategies, and tools in order to be able to leverage resources that are available. What we're going to do here is we're going to start big. We're going to start macro. We're going to show you that there are initiatives around the world to acknowledge just how important it is to find the right strategies. And slowly but surely, we're going to narrow ourselves down in order to be able to see what's being done here in Quebec, in Montreal right now, that you can start to put into effect. So going globally, the World Economic Forum is an organization that brings together businesses, that brings together governments and citizens in order to help make the world a better place. And they have identified informal caregiving as a top workplace trend that needs to be addressed. They also identify that addressing the needs of people who are juggling work and care is going to be an advantage to attract top talent. Staying global, you have the Mercer Consulting Group, who did a study back in 2023 that identified that right now, 71% of employees have some type of caregiving responsibilities. And so for employers who consider the health and happiness of their employees important, it's necessary and imperative that they include types of initiatives to support their working caregivers in order to accomplish that. Going on the other side of the world right now, Australia has decided to take a more human rights approach. So employers actually have to adhere to policies that are being put in place by policymakers that are human rights initiatives. And then you've got an organization in New Zealand called Carers New Zealand, which is a grassroots-led organization, just like AGI, who is leading the charge and helping to provide guidance and conversations for carers, people who are juggling work and care. Now, if we move over to Europe, Europe is taking a more collective strategic approach, the European Union is, on how to think about developing policies to support working caregivers. And in the UK, there is an employer-led initiative called Employers for Carers, who are again facilitating the type of language that is required to help integrating policies and strategies for employees accessible when they're juggling work and care. Coming a little bit more stateside in the US, oftentimes, the employers in the US oftentimes incorporate the supporting working caregivers in mental health and wellness initiatives. And there are a lot of community organizations that put together different guides, again, to help the different decision makers at different employers to put policies down. Now, there's one unique thing to notice about employers or about these community groups in the US, and that is the definition that they apply to informal caregiving. While it does include aging, illness, and disability, as it does here in Canada, the bigger distinction is that they also include parental responsibilities in the term caregiver. So if ever you are interested in looking at different types of guides that are put together in the US, just take note of that here in Canada, we do have a completely different distinction between parents and aging, illness, and disability. There are also organizations like the Rosalind Carter Institute who make sure that they provide the resources for employers to host events and be able to make the language inclusive for working caregivers. And HR departments or HR associations, this is on top of mind for many of them to facilitate that dialogue. Nora, tell us what's going on in Quebec.
Great, thank you. So the first thing that we want to share with you, which is absolutely no surprise to you, is that nearly 1 in 4 people in Quebec are caregivers. You're here today because either you are that 1 in 4, or you support and are interested in making sure that that 1 in 4 gets what they need in order to be able to fulfill their multiple responsibilities. If you are the one, it really doesn't matter if you're 1 in 4, 1 in 10, 1 in 1,000, you're the one. So we're going to be focusing in on you. What is it that you have at your fingertips and how best to leverage those as a caregiver in Quebec? Most caregivers are supporting aging parents. Those of you on this call are likely in that category. And of those, more than half are also managing employment in some way, shape, or form. But you're also putting in tons of hours of care each week. So the more hours you put in, the greater the likelihood that there's going to have an impact on your employability or your employment or your career path, or, as we all know, your stress levels. So what we want to start with here is to talk about what are caregiver-initiated strategies, what we know caregivers tend to try as they're beginning this journey of juggling multiple responsibilities. First is they either try to hide it or they leave the workplace. So they take early retirement, they quit, but there's actually a whole lot more you can do besides that. First and foremost, there's absolutely no reason to hide it. You can share with your employer what your caregiving demands are without jeopardizing the privacy and confidentiality of the person you are providing care for. So your employer doesn't need to know if your loved one has dementia, what stage it is. They don't need to know any of that. That's your loved one's private medical business. You might get pressure from an employer to ask. Create those boundaries. It's not your medical news to share. It belongs to your loved one. So we're trying to get more managers to understand all you need to ask is, what supports do you need from a manager's perspective, and from an employee's perspective, what do you need in order to thrive? The medical details, irrelevant. Some choose to move to different locations, try job sharing or alternative work arrangements, or many go from a full-time and gradually or suddenly go to part-time. That often leads to a career break or a leave that may be a paid leave or an unpaid leave. some just say, I can't manage a full-time employment or a job where I don't have control over time. So they might start their own business or go into gig work. So I want to share a story about a guy that I met recently, my Uber driver. Turns out he was a caregiver. He was working in a large organization in Montreal. He wanted flexibility. He wasn't able to get it in the job he had. So he left that job. He went on an indefinite leave, so he could return to it at some point. But in the meantime, he's driving Uber, and it gives him flexibility. So he only makes himself available when the respite people are there, when other family members are there, when his loved one is at a program or at therapy, and he puts his light on and boom, off he goes, and he works that kind of a very flexible, fully controllable gig job. If you're in a small organization, usually there isn't policies or practices. Normally, it's just all for one for all. How can we support each other? There's usually more informal, it's okay, I got your back. Cynthia, you go take that appointment, or she'll say to me, it's okay, come in a little bit later. So there's a little bit more sort of informal flexibility or support as much as possible. When you are working for a small or medium-sized organization, chances are you won't have a human resources department or an expert in HR laws or rules or what you can and cannot do. So the best thing in a small organization is to start a conversation with the business owner or with your team lead and try to come up with individual strategies. And if that doesn't work, then seek other assistance, either through the HR associations or other community-based organizations, or sometimes even business organizations, small business organizations will have resources and support for you.
And Nora, I just wanted to jump in very quickly on this and the importance of providing backup. Now, I know that when we're caregiving, a lot of the times we feel that everything is on our shoulders, and you know, it's easier to just have everything to ourselves, so that, you know, including somebody else in our processes can seem really challenging. But in the workplace specifically, just being able to have somebody know where your stuff is, that you can do the handoff as quickly as possible should a crisis come up, provides the flexibility that, you know, we talk about. Flexibility doesn't just come about with hours. It also comes about with this job sharing, this backup, and this not needing to ramp people up very quickly on where your stuff is. It's just, hey, I'm not going to be able to be in today. This is where my stuff is, and that kind of alleviates a lot of the pressure.
The other day I was in an elevator. We were going up a tower, and I was talking to somebody about the importance of work and care. And just by absolute sheer luck, two people standing behind us were talking. As she gets into the elevator, he asks her how things are going, and she describes all what she's going through in caring for her dad. And it's like, here it is, live. I didn't plan this. This is real. It's everywhere. But I do agree, Cynthia, that it's really important to have those conversations, to find a way to express yourself, to propose some solutions, to be creative, and be open, and be willing to experiment. Because what might work today may not work a month from now. And what worked last month might not be working today. So there's going to be constant adjustment as you go through. Let me just tell you a story about a cafe I was in. It was a small sort of community-based coffee shop where they actually roast their own coffee. And my regular barista wasn't available. And I said, oh, where's Joe this morning? And she said, oh, Joe's taking his mom to a doctor's appointment. I said, oh, that's kind of cool that you're backing him up. And she said, we're a team. That's what we do. And I said, do you like keep track of that? And she said, oh, it's like family. You just step in, you step up, and you do what needs to be done. So small organizations give you a lot of that kind of flexibility, but at the same time, what they don't give you is some structure and some tools and some backing. So let's look at those larger organizations that do. If you're in a larger organization, or if you are in a unionized work environment, chances are you will have employment agreements that might specify things. You might have HR manuals. You might have benefits portals on your website at work. What's important here to do is to try to know what it is that you're looking for. Are you looking for support? Because a lot of large organizations do provide extensive support, either through an EAP or an EFAP, which provides counseling and information and resources. And some of them even provide group counseling. Or there's something called an employee resource group, which is where a group of employees who share an experience, such as caregiving, meet on a regular basis. In some large organizations, they even receive a budget where they can bring in experts, or they can bring in supports and tools. If you're in a large organization and there isn't an ERG yet, there's no reason why you can't propose starting one. And just if you build it, they will come, as the movie quote is. A lot of people find other caregivers in large organizations by holding a lunch and learn, or holding their inaugural ERG meeting on care and work. So you can find lots of support. Another category or bucket is around time, paid time, flex time, unpaid time. And so it's all about how you offset some of the financial costs of caregiving, because as we all know, there's lots of out-of-pocket costs and consequences. Some unions have negotiated top-ups. So if you're receiving a benefit through the government, then you can top up that, or some employers top that up so that you are actually receiving more than the government offers. Looking at work or the job, you can flex it, you can remote. We've all had experience with that during COVID. Leaves, paid leaves, extended unpaid leaves. Just explore all your options, because quitting isn't always necessary. And then, of course, training others, training managers, training supervisors, all of those kinds of things also are huge benefits to employees.
From a personal experience, the both times that I was a caregiver, the first time I was working for a large aerospace company here in Quebec, and the second time I was working for a large IT firm. And each time I was kind of thrown into this role of having to care for my parent. One of the most critical components to me being able to embrace kind of the role was the support that I had of my manager. They say that people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. And the relationship between, or the openness that a manager is able to provide an employee, is critical to being able to do the very necessary work of juggling work and care. And this is not to say that managers have to be psychologists and therapists and allow, for people to cry on their shoulders. It's just more of being a leader and offering the opportunity to provide guidance, a stable footing and grounding on understanding, to your point earlier, Nora, about not necessarily needing to know the details of a person's their carries medical condition, but the types of support that are required, and maybe be able to make the link between the resources that do exist for their employees so that they can elicit the most out of them. Caregiving is such an uncertain, and you talked about this in the first part of this series, it's so uncertain and it's constantly changing, and it throws the person who's caregiving off balance. And so to have that manager in the workplace be the stable footing to help pivot, direct, point that employee in the right direction is critical to the experience.
And, the adage is, there's 4 types of people in the world: those who are caregivers, those who have been caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who are care receivers. And if you start looking around your workplace, whether you're in a small or a large organization, you will find others who have either been, are, or expect to be caregivers going forward. I just want to tell you a little story about a client of mine. So you can go to the next, there we go. An executive, very accomplished professional, very, lots and lots of responsibility. And he and I had been talking, we were talking about forming a number of resource groups and doing some training. And he phones me up and he goes, Nora, I need your help. I just got a call from the hospital. My mom's being discharged. What do I do? And I said, well, you need to talk to the hospital and you need to make sure that there's a plan for her discharge and that you've got everything that you need and everything's in place before she actually leaves the hospital. And he said, too late. I brought her home. Okay, how can I help you exactly? And he says, well, she needs to go to the bathroom. What do I do? And I said, well, better to do something now than to wait and hope it's going to resolve itself, because chances are it won't. He said, I've never even seen my mother in her underwear. And put her on the toilet. How do I do that? So I walk him through how to do that with dignity and respect and honor and privacy and all of that. And then I said, we need to do a session at your workplace because this isn't going to be good for anybody. So, sometimes it's a little, it might not be your experience. It might be an employee or a manager or an owner or somebody that brings this to the forefront and seize those opportunities as you get them.
We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but at the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, there was this workplace roundtable report that was done, soliciting the feedback from different employers across Canada and across North America. And, one of the things that's so critical in order to be able to help in this kind of fostering this culture that is supportive of working caregivers is telling the stories and sharing stories, especially from executives who allow for this conversation and these awkward, uncomfortable experiences to be seen. You were saying, Nora, that, we shouldn't be afraid to talk about caregiving at work. And, we don't have to be divulging too much about our caree's condition, but there's a lot of fear and stigma that's still attached to it. People are afraid that they're going to be seen as weak or they're not going to be as valuable in the workplace. So it is imperative for the employer to allow for these conversations. And the best way is to have executives, the people from the top down, sharing those very real stories.
And the more we can normalize those conversations, the more we can share those stories and embed the language. A lot of organizations have great supports for parents with young children. It doesn't take much to open their eyes and say, yeah, and there's other kinds of caregiving as well. Or bringing examples or solutions that either you've tried or you've heard other people try, whether it's a competitor organization or a client or customer organization or somebody else on your team, and you just keep building and building this knowledge base, and it makes it easier for you and for the people coming up behind you.
Absolutely. And one of the ways to do that too is not necessarily even just creating a caregiver specific story to highlight, but embedding it in other areas. You know, again, working in IT and in aerospace, every quarter you have promotions or you celebrate your colleagues, right? And there's this blurb of all their accomplishments. Well, what does it take to include in that accomplishment and doing all of this while caring for so-and-so, you know, a family member at home or taking on those responsibilities, really because caregiving is embedded in who we are. And so just highlighting it is that simple allowance for these conversations to be had.
Yep, agreed.
So getting the most, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Cynthia's going to now walk you through how best to get the most out of your options, and then we'll move into some resources and supports. If you have any questions while we're going through this material, please don't wait to the end. Just put them in the chat or the Q&A box, so you can find the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen, and just give us whatever questions you have. If for some reason we don't get to them during the session, we will make sure that you get the answers after the fact. Thanks.
So yeah, so getting the most out of your options. You know, I did the caregiving twice, like I said, and one of the things that came out of the experience for me, both juggling all of the responsibilities. So my mother had terminal cancer and I was at home. You talked about Nora earlier, like needing to set up the house like a facility, right? I ran the house, I ran all of the responsibilities almost like a business. I ran it like a project because that's what was necessary out of being able to get everything done. And there was this realization during that process, and actually highlighted by the Harvard Business Review, that caregiving actually is an opportunity to build and foster brand new skills that are applicable not only at home, but also in the workplace. And so when thinking about even potentially engaging your employer on seeking out the options that you have to, you know, adjust your schedule or adjust your working arrangements to accommodate caregiving, one of the things that's really important to do is to reframe the experience so that you can come at this from a position of power almost. You come at this from a position of strength and realize that caregiving is a career asset. So, you know, there are many skills that are listed on in terms of what we gain. The ability to have empathy. If you're in the management space right now, you know that empathy and emotional intelligence is a huge buzzword as a competitive skill and as a leadership skill. You learn how to be more efficient. You have tenacity. You figure out how to prioritize your tasks, and there's teamwork and there's patience, and all of this can be done in the workplace. Now, it doesn't necessarily feel that you're actively building these skills, and a lot of time it's trial and error, but at the end of it and on the other side of it, there is this wealth of experience that you have, and that's something that you want to carry with you when you're armed into having the conversations and doing your research on what's available to you. So when talking about it, when you want to make a proposal to your employer, you want to look at engaging your employer at helping you with navigating work and care. The thing to do at first is to do your research. And by doing your research, it's not about going to a library and taking out books. It's really trying to figure out the unique opportunities that lie within your organization. So it's about trying to find out other caregivers and not putting an APB out, finding them, but just mentioning, dropping things into a conversation. You know, there are 30% of Canadians right now who are in the work, or 30% of the workforce right now is juggling work and care. So chances are you're going to find that 1 in 3 who is caregiving. So ask them and incorporate that in conversations. Find out what has worked maybe in other needs for flexible arrangements. You know, you might be thinking hours, but you might have an opportunity, like you were seeing earlier strategies that Nora had mentioned, to maybe shift your working hours or go to a part-time and see what your employer has been open to. And And then again, looking for the resources yourself. Right now, the utilization for employee assistance programs is about 11 or 12%. It's so low. So there are actually access to benefits that we have that we don't even think to go look for. So that's where you do your research. And then you move on to the proposal and understanding that caregiving is a constantly changing and evolving experience. So too will your proposal. And so you put this out there and you pilot it. You see if whatever you think might work, both for your organization and yourself, see how it goes. See if it's actually accomplishing what you're trying to have it accomplish, and be open to adjusting and being flexible to adjusting the strategy that you propose. And then when you find a sweet spot, you find something that does work. If you do work for an employer who has an employee resource group, or you do have an opportunity for sharing how things work, there's a lot of return to office mandates. People are going back in the office space. And I'm old school, so I come mostly from working in the office, and that proverbial water cooler is a great place to bring up these things from a place of confidence, owning that you're a caregiver, owning that you are balancing work and care, and that you have found a strategy that works for you. But this is the thing that is really key that we need to call out, is that, we threw up, or Nora threw up on the slides, so many different options. But the thing to keep in mind is that there are 8 million Canadians right now who are caregivers. There are 6.1 million who are working caregivers, and there are just as many unique caregiving stories. So the solution has to be customized and tailored to you. There's not going to ever be a one size fits all. So if you are self-employed and a contractor, what works for you is going to be completely different than if you are working part-time. And it's okay. There's no right or wrong answer. There really truly is just the ability to see your needs as being unique so that you can adjust your strategy to that. Nora, I'll turn it over to you to share with the audience on the resources and caregiving available.
So, we've talked a lot about you're not alone. You're not the first one to go through this. You certainly will not be the last. But you also don't have to do this alone. Cynthia's just described a lot of ways to get information, to share, to learn from each other. But there are other resources that are available, and we're just going to walk through some of them. In Quebec, actually, there is a fairly strong focus on caregivers. Now, you'll hear the term informal caregivers. If you're looking after a loved one, you're likely not going to think that there's anything informal about that. That language just means that you are not a paid care provider. So although the term informal may not sit well with you, it's sort of the language of the space. So the province of Quebec did establish a caregivers action plan that has runs from 2021 through to 2026. And we're sort of coming to the end of that, but a number of things have come out of that. One is a piece of legislation actually that recognizes and supports caregivers. And that's relatively new, but it is there. And so we don't have a lot of precedent around how that's actually being applied yet, but it's another stepping stone that you have available. In Quebec, there's also both within Quebec law and federal law, an employer does have a duty to accommodate due to family status. Now, not all employers understand this, but if necessary, you may want to consult a lawyer or reach out to the human rights organizations in your community to see if you are covered under the duty to accommodate. The thing to remember about that is that the employer only has a duty to accommodate up to a point of hardship for the employer. Pretty vague definition of what that hardship is. So it's not something that you would go into lightly or something that you would choose as your first point. Any of these accommodations that you're wanting to proceed with through these kinds of legislation or provincial policies, you're going to require something called a medical attestation. And you can get that. It's a formal form that any medical professional, healthcare professional, or allied healthcare professional, so nurses, doctors, gerontologists, you could get it from a occupational therapist or physiotherapist. So if you're going to go that route, your first step is medical attestation that you're an informal caregiver. Your employer may also require that to determine your eligibility for flexibility or top up to benefits. So it's something that you may want to consider. And there's lots of information on the internet where you can get the forms and how you can fill them out.
And it might seem daunting, but there is something actually really reassuring that for calling yourself a family caregiver and filling out this form, because as Nora's going to walk us through, there are actually benefits that are available both from a financial and an hourly compensation basis.
So a couple of things that you want to think about when you're exploring working caregiver benefits in Quebec. We talked earlier about time and money. There's time off, there's time away, there's leaves, paid and unpaid leaves, and then there's cash benefits. And sometimes they sort of go together. It's not just about the absence. So if you take a break, what you want to do is you want to have job protection, which means when you're ready to come back to work, that job will be there for you. Now, depending on which benefit you opt for, that job may be a job, not the job. So you may have left the job as a customer service person for a particular district. You might not necessarily get back the job. You may be assigned to a different district or a different, they just need to make sure that you don't lose. The phrase is keep whole. So keep that in mind when you want to return to work after a short or long-term absence. So there are a number of paid and unpaid options where your job is protected, and some of them are listed here. But there's also employment insurance benefits, and these are benefits, it's like maternity benefits or unemployment insurance benefits, or what they call standard benefits, where you receive 55% of earnings for a period of time while you are either providing care as a caregiver or providing compassionate care. Compassionate care is sort of end of life care. But there's also measures through the tax code. You can get the caregiver credit in Quebec. There's also federal tax credits that you can apply for when you're doing your taxes each year. Best to consult your a financial advisor, whoever does your income tax or supports you to do your income tax, to make sure that you get all of those benefits. Even if you don't earn an income, it's better to file an income tax, file your income taxes with zero income, because you can qualify for a whole bunch of credits and benefits. If you don't submit a tax return, zero income, you may not be eligible for some of those benefits. So speak to your financial advisor, speak to your kids, speak to whoever your trusted advisors are around financial management and tax.
And I just want to call out, it feels like there's a lot on our shoulders again, and that we have to be the ones to speak to the family, to the financial advisors. Unfortunately, this conversation is not yet so rampant that they will necessarily know to ask you, are you a caregiver, to take advantage of those things. So it really is imperative on you to make sure that you're asking those questions, not just of financial advisors or of accountants, but any other type of social service, to say, hey, I have caregiver status. Is there any other availability or any other resource available to me that I might not be aware of?
As much as you're an advocate for your loved one, you also need to be a self-advocate in this space, for sure. Whether you're working for a small organization or self-employed or a large organization, you may be the first to go through this exploration or to receive some of these benefits. So don't hesitate to raise your hand, to knock on doors, to advocate for yourself, because every step counts for all other caregivers in your workplace. There's also some resources in Quebec, in particular, coming out of all of that legislation is an organization that's specifically looking at the reconciliation between work and care. You can go to their website. There's a number of resources there, both in French and in English, for you as caregivers, but also for employers. So if you ever want sort of a leave behind after you've had a conversation with your manager or the business owner or your union rep, it's a really good resource for you in Quebec. Again, some of these are for either directed at you as the caregiver or your employer. Worth checking out. Both Cynthia and I are consultants to the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. It's a national organization. Their website has a ton of information. There is actually a resource list. You can go down to the province of Quebec. All of the major organizations, including AGI, are in there if you want to explore. And there's also a special place for young caregivers. So whether it's you yourself who might be under 30 who's providing care, or you might have somebody in your circle of care that's either supporting you or assisting in caring for your loved one, there's a resource support hub for young carers in Quebec that you might want to check out.
And I just want to call out, a lot of the times when we talk about caregiving and being caregivers, we don't necessarily carry the title of caregiver. We don't think to carry the title of caregiver. And so we're not actually attuned to looking for all of the resources. But as you do see what Nora has outlined, and also with through the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, there are a lot of incredible conversations and resources that are becoming more and more available. The conversation around informal family caregiving, the necessity to support this huge demographic, really exploded out of the COVID pandemic, just realizing how much we support people who are going through different aging related or physical illnesses. And so it takes a little bit less sleuth work now and just more sifting because of all that is indeed available. I had mentioned a little bit earlier that the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence did some research and did these 2 roundtable reports. The purpose of this research and of these roundtables was to see what was currently working, what maybe hasn't worked, and help to really share in a peer type group all of the things that are being done kind of in Canada as informing and sharing information with one another. And, I mentioned earlier, leading with stories was one of the big items that came out of it. But there's also other winning conditions, that gathering data, and this is something that's really important, knowing and just acknowledging and measuring who in the workforce is actually caring is kind of a first step for employers to understand where they need to go in terms of providing supports. If you have the 30% of your workforce that is the majority of them are caring for people with Alzheimer's, well, then providing resources to support in cancer might not necessarily be an option. And so understanding who you have and having awareness of who's working with you helps employers to tailor and foster the language, the supports around what is really going to be most beneficial.
Agreed. So just to wrap up our presentation today, we've got 2 closing thoughts for you. One for managers and owners, and this is actually a quote that came from some of that work that Cynthia just described. from an HR leader, human resources leader, who said, for managers and owners, the most important thing is be patient and be forgiving. You won't get it right the first time. Sit in that uncomfortable feeling to move things forward. Talk to the people, pick up the phone, ask employees who have been or who are caregivers, ask what would have been helpful for them. In this day and age, the last thing employers want is what's referred to as turnover, regrettable turnover. Regrettable turnover costs organizations a lot of money. It's much more effective to be supportive of your workforce than to try to replace somebody who's been forced to leave in order to provide care. And the last message we want to leave for you is for you. We've been talking in both parts of this series, the importance of remembering that you're not alone, although some nights it certainly feels like it does. When it's cold and it's dark, you might feel alone, but in fact, you're not. Wrap yourself around with that as you go through those dark, cold nights. You don't have to figure it all out alone. There are a lot of people who are there to provide you with resources and support. And remember that nobody can tell you how to do this. There is no if this, then that, done. It is going to require some trial and error. It's going to require some innovation, creativity, experimentation. And when you finally find the perfect solution that works beautifully for you right now, it might not work for you a month or two from now. And what worked for you a month or two ago might not necessarily continue to work for you today. So remember, you're not alone. You don't have to figure it out alone. And there will be constant change, constant learning. Be open to that. Be available to that learning. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it and receive it gracefully when it's offered. If we can be of any assistance to you, if you would like another presentation at your workplace, if you've got questions, if you have solutions or strategies that have worked for you that you would love to share with us that we could then pass on to others, we would be delighted to do so. You can reach out to either one of us, and we'd be happy to find the right source of information or inspiration for you as you proceed on your work and care journey. It's been a pleasure for me to be here with you for these part 1 and part 2 of this series. I'll let Cynthia do the same. And just before she does, I just want to add a big thank you. And I'll do that right after Cynthia. Cynthia, do you want to do your closing words?
Yes, I do want to just say thank you as well for having me here. And I do want to acknowledge that what you are doing as a caregiver is extremely important work. And not all the systems are going to recognize you. The healthcare system doesn't necessarily do a good job when you're in the moment, and employers are just coming up to speed, but that does not negate the value of the work that you're doing, not only for the person that you're caring for, but everybody in that person's network. So thank you for everything that you do.
And special thanks to AGI and to Molly and the crew who make it possible for us to hang out with you, to Karen and others at AGI. It's a delight for us to come and hang out with you from time to time. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you to all of the people in your circle that make it possible for you to hang out with us for this hour. We wish you all the very best in your caregiving and in your ability to, or the effort that you're putting into caring and working at the same time. Thank you so much.
Just a quick thank you again at the end for all of this. This was a really lovely presentation. For those of you who want to watch it again, it is recorded. It will be up on our YouTube channel in the next few weeks, where many more people will get an opportunity to benefit from it as well. So thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Great. Goodbye.